Good evening, and welcome to the Friday Symposium. It's Friday, February 27th, and I think everyone is sort of waiting, I hate to say it, for when a war with Iran will begin. Hopefully that does not occur, but Ambassador Huckabee told Israel told Americans in the embassy in Israel, the U.S. embassy in Israel, that they could leave. The United States, just in the last hours, told Americans in Iran that they should leave. China has done the same. It's clearly on the edge, and for what? There is no reason for such a war. It's certainly not for the United States to be involved in. Iran has not attacked the United States, hasn't invaded the United States. Iran, frankly, hasn't invaded Israel. They haven't attacked Israel except in response to Israeli attacks on Iran. They have not initiated attacks. So this is yet another unconstitutional, illegal war of aggression, if it is to begin, and fraught with I shouldn't say unpredictable, because people who think can imagine what some of the consequences might be, but we have a Trump administration and a fanatical Israeli administration under Bibi Netanyahu, who seem to be, in the case of the Trump team, unable to consider the consequences of their actions. In the case of Bibi Netanyahu, I think he actually takes a sadistic, messianic, cultish pleasure in unleashing hell on earth, because perhaps he thinks it's going to bring on the Messiah or something or other. I'm not sure why, but it's very dangerous. Part of the backdrop to all of this is the end of the transatlantic British imperial system. But of course, that's not what we're being told in the United States. That's not what President Trump said in his State of the Union address. So I am bringing on tonight two economists, longtime associates of Lyndon LaRouche, Richard Freeman and Paul Gallagher, to discuss what actually would be parameters for how to measure an economic success, why you can say that what we are in right now is not an economic recovery. And they've just written a paper that was published in Executive Intelligence Review on this topic, and have written actually quite a bit of other material, special reports and so on, which people can find at larouchepub.com, and you can subscribe at eir.news. So I believe Paul is going to start us off. So Paul, please welcome and go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I'll get this off hopefully to a quick start, because I was on this symposium, I'm not remembering exactly, but 5 or 6 weeks ago, on this very subject, and said at that time that the sun was beginning to set on the Trump administration's economy, and that this would, especially if Congress were to get involved, because the Congress has been shelved by a blizzard of executive actions, taking away its own authorities, its own powers, for regulating the currency, for regulating budget and spending, and many other authorities that Congress has that have been turned into executive actions and with scarcely a protest. So I was hoping to throw some light and maybe some kinetic motion in that direction. There has been a little, but what was going on with the Trump economy has gotten worse in that period of time, and it's going exactly along the lines that I sketched out at that time. Of course, the worst aspect of it is the hollowing out of the remaining workforce in manufacturing in the United States, which has lost in this 1 year the at this point estimated, there is not a final figure, but estimated 100,000 manufacturing employment positions have disappeared, despite what the president said in the election and at the beginning of his term, that he was going to make the United States a manufacturing power once again. The opposite has been occurring, and that hollowing out, combined with the attempt really to eject from the country a significant number of, not only a large number of human beings, but a significant number of manufacturing workers, tending to be at the lower wage end of that sector. The administration has been attempting to simply eject them from the country, and to, in that sense, not only to lower the manufacturing workforce dramatically, but even to lower the population. If they do achieve the goals, which they haven't so far, but if they do achieve the goals of deportations that they've set, they would be effectively reducing the population of the country. So that's the most serious aspect of it, as we could get into. But more on the surface, it's now reached the point where even the mumbo jumbo from Wall Street, the daily chatter about financial happenings and so forth, has started to use the term stagflation. Stag meaning stagnation in productive capacity and in physical production in the economy, and inflation obviously meaning combining that underlying shrinkage of physical production with accelerating inflation, which we've seen today. We've seen for the last 2 months in particular, very high rate of inflation break out in what's called the producer price index. That is the prices that companies charge to each other for both finished products and more significantly for systems and components of those products. It's clear that the tariffs, which have failed both economically, they haven't brought in the income in the trillions, which was talked about, only $260 billion in tariffs. And it must be remembered, it must be learned by many people, but definitely once learned must be remembered, that all those tariff taxes were paid by us. They were paid by American businesses and American consumers. They are taxes. They may have had an impact, a negative impact, on exporters in other countries who wanted to export to the United States. They may have had to lower their prices slightly or to redirect their exports elsewhere. But those tariff taxes have been paid by us, not by anybody else. The entire, easily $250 billion of the total have been paid by U.S. businesses, U.S. consumers, wholesalers, retailers. That's who has paid them. The total has not come anywhere near denting the national debt in the slightest. That continues to rise to just under 39 trillion at this point. That continues to be more and more short term. That is the debt certificates that the Treasury is issuing in order to borrow and to roll over its debt are getting shorter and shorter in their term. More bills, more instruments of a year or less in duration, making it more volatile, making it more speculative. And this is the world's largest bubble of clearly unrepayable debt, is that 39 trillion. But at the same time now, we're seeing other debt bubbles, which are showing themselves dramatically now that the underlying physical economy is tending towards starting to shrink. One of these bubbles is called private credit. It's what we used to call leveraged lending. It simply means lending to companies that may or may not qualify to be loaned to at all, because it isn't examined and it isn't regulated as to whether they qualify for loans. We've had now two bankruptcies in the auto sector, First Brands and then Tricolor Holdings. We've had a bigger bankruptcy than either of those, or not bankruptcy yet, but a bigger financial distress than either of those in a company called Blue Owl, a private equity lender called Blue Owl Capital, which had to prevent its investors, its lenders. This is private equity, what they call private credit, tends to be essentially collecting company or hedge fund that collects investments from a lot of individuals, wealthy individuals, or small investment firms, and in an unregulated manner, completely unregulated manner, lends them, puts them out on the lending market for companies of all kinds. This Blue Owl had to grab onto the capital that had been put into it and prevent anybody from withdrawing it, because they were having a liquidity crisis. Now, just yesterday, I believe, maybe the day before, a UK company called MFS, Market Financial Solutions, has actually gone into bankruptcy. It's another of these private credit lenders, in this case in the British economy, but it lends internationally. So this is one after another in this bubble of unrepayable debt, which is nowhere near the size of the Treasury bubble of unrepayable debt, but they're beginning to accumulate and to shake. And this has to happen with what is happening to the underlying productive economy of the country. Not only were those tariffs paid by us, but they, as taxes, but they resulted in no reduction in the deficit. In fact, the federal trade deficit for the year was 4.5% higher than the year before. They produced no significant increase in exports from the United States. They produced a larger increase in imports, and hence a larger trade deficit. This manufacturing employment I've already mentioned. The United States is not being turned into a manufacturing superpower, or even a manufacturing exporting country, really. It's shedding manufacturing jobs at the rate of nearly 10,000 a month. It's producing new employment. That is, it's creating new jobs of any kind: manufacturing, services, wasteful, anything. All those combined, it's producing them at only about 15,000 a month, a really minuscule rate. I mean, even the Biden administration did far, far better than that. It was claiming 100, 150,000, sometimes 200,000 new job positions a month. It was doing that with some dubious statistical reporting and also with a lot of subsidizing. That brings up the subject of the State of the Union address, which was an occasion in which the president made clear, if you knew what you were listening to, he made clear that he and his billionaire government there, billionaire team of cabinet secretaries and economic advisors, they are aware of what I'm talking about. They're aware of the actual condition of the economy after 1 year of Trump's promises and failures. And that condition is bad enough that what the president has been doing during the State of the Union and in the basically week on either side of the State of the Union is he's been reaching back to the Biden administration and coming up with various subsidies in order to tell consumers, that is working people, to tell them that he's going to make inflation easier for them. He's going to make it possible for them to buy houses, which right now are unaffordable for a majority of households in the United States. He promised to use some means or other of either coercion or subsidies in order to prevent high-tech firms or financial firms, such as Blackstone, that's the biggest of them, from buying up new housing and then renting it out, driving the rents up nationally and driving up the price of the original purchase price of the homes, making it harder to next to impossible for people to buy a first home, so that instead they wind up renting from these Wall Street big speculators like Blackstone, BlackRock, and others. The president was claiming that he's going to stop that. What's being discussed among his team of billionaires is perhaps tax incentives to people buying a home or buying their first home that's going to enable them to outbid these Wall Street biggies. Don't look for that to happen, but that's apparently what's being discussed. He was also he introduced something called Trump RX, which he said was going to make drugs cheaper. It's going to have very limited application, basically to people who don't have drug insurance at all. They don't have insurance for buying medications at all. And it's similar to the kind of coupons that one can already get, which give manufacturers discounts on those drugs to people who don't have insurance to cover them at all. He's done various things of that sort, indicating that for the American people and increasingly for his own base, the so-called MAGA base, more and more is becoming unaffordable. Healthcare, housing, auto loans, more and more of this is becoming unaffordable. And now you have the breakout of serious inflation, this producer price inflation, 0.5% in January, another 0.8% in February. This is really going now at quite a rate. So as I said, this was basically what I was pointing to 6 months ago, or 6 weeks ago, I'm sorry, and urging that Congress retake some of its authorities from the crew of executive order people from the White House, and retaking those authorities, that it then began with a sensible economic recovery policy based on credit, not on crypto, not on speculation, but on a creation of a national bank which can actually provide credit to manufacturing and other productive firms and provide the credit necessary for infrastructure and for cooperation with other major countries that have such national credit institutions, in particular China, in making infrastructure loans to third parties, third countries. So that begins to indicate the direction in which Congress could go if they would take back their authorities, which have been seized by the president. But otherwise, as I said, the sun is setting on this Trump economy, and at the same time, there are very dark clouds arising in financial markets, which could lead to something worse than mere stagflation. That is something like another financial crash. So I'm going to leave it at that for Richard to pick up, and then we can have discussion of it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, I'm really, I'm sure that many people would like to get one of those 50-year mortgages that's going to the cost of housing.
Or a 7-year car loan or 8-year car loan for a $50,000 average car.
Yeah, and you end up paying the bank double or triple what you paid for the thing. And the banker spends 10 minutes on it, but they make $500,000. It's so outrageous. Okay, Richard, what do you have to tell us?
Okay, I would like to build on what Paul was saying and focus on two things. One is the trade deficit, and the other is the State of the Union. I'm going to pick one aspect of it, which I think is extremely important. On the trade deficit, am I on share, or what do I have to do? Oh, there you go. Okay. So this is just an open statement. If 2025, the U.S. physical goods trade deficit, that's not goods and services, but just the goods that support industrial and agriculture and so forth development, was $1.241 trillion. It's the highest in history. It's the highest in America's history. It's the highest in the history of the world, and so forth. And as I indicated when we had a discussion with others a few days ago, if you were a scientist and you had a year of your policy, which you said was the tariffs were going to turn everything around and make America a great physical economy again and so forth, and you had something of such a monumental failure, you might say to yourself, I have to reconsider my hypotheses and my policies. That will not occur with Trump, but I am saying that's what we should look at. In this situation, I will just say that physical goods imports rose by $143 billion, exports only by $117 billion. This is just the physical goods. So it expanded. And of course, keeping the failure, the idea that we're going to keep goods out of the United States totally failed. They grew by almost $12 billion a month. Now, in this setting, I just want to mention that this information was released of the trade deficit on the 19th of February. On the 20th of February, the Supreme Court finally weighed in, and by a 6-3 vote, a 6-3 ruling, stated that the way Trump put together his trade policy was in violation of the Constitution. And it was it was illegal and various features. It is interesting that among the 6 justices who voted for the Constitution, and this was a vote for the United States Constitution, because it said, as the Constitution has said, and this is in the opinion of Justice Roberts, who's the chief judge of the Supreme Court, he said that the ability to raise tariffs and the ability to raise taxes belongs with the Congress under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. So this was a violation of it. But 2 of the justices who voted against Trump were Trump appointees, recent appointees. It was just too strongly egregious. What Trump did, just in essence, and Paul referenced this, is he used, in this case, something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, of 1977, And also in other things he did, the National Emergencies Power Act of 1976. Both of these acts do deal with emergencies. So what Trump's game plan was to say these are emergencies and take things which are not good, like a trade deficit, simply say they're emergencies and bypass the Congress, as Paul indicated, entirely. So that we are ruling under emergency decrees. And I would remind people, if you think back to Nazi Germany, if people have read this in the history books, it's very clear. You have the Reichstag fire in February of 1933. In March of 1933, you have the Enabling Act, which allowed the Hitler regime to disregard the parliament, the Reichstag, and to disregard the president, and to rule by emergency decree. And then afterwards, people probably remember, people started ending up in concentration camps. I'm not saying we're going at that level, but in this situation, I just want to say about this rivets us, it should, to how rotten the physical economy of the United States is. This is a resounding statement of that. And in that, I'll just mention one feature of it. Look at the agricultural trade deficit. In 2024, in physical goods terms again, $31.8 billion. In 2025, under Trump, it was between, we don't have the official figure yet, but the American Farm Bureau says it's between 47.5 billion and 49 billion. That is a 50% increase in 1 year. So this is a complete destruction of the agricultural base, which already suffers from international cartels running this basis. The last thing I just want to say about the trade deficit, and it resounds all over the place, but Trump's not going to pay attention to this. He already said that he's going to use Section 122 of the 1974 Tariff Act to just go back and impose, and he has, a 15% tariff. His tariffs are struck down. They're struck down. They're not. They should be, and then they don't exist. So he's going to go back and use something else, again, to get around Congress. One thing people should know is that in the year 2025, there were only 200 enacted pieces of legislation in Congress. That's the lowest level in 50 years because Trump is ruling by emergency decree. He has just discarded the Congress where you might have debate and opposite views, and you might have people rationally reject what the president was doing. But so that's one feature I would just say. But just to keep in mind, this trade policy was originated by the Heritage Foundation, which I won't go through in full here. But one key feature or person at the Heritage Foundation, and there are several, and also Scott Bessant, who's the Secretary of Treasury, and also Ludwig, who's the Secretary of Commerce. But the leading financier or group that runs the Heritage Foundation, or one of those, is the Mellon-Scaife Foundation. Richard Mellon-Scaife, when he was alive, who played a very big role in this, was the principal one of the major, actually I think the principal financier of the Get LaRouche task force to put Lyndon LaRouche in jail. That's the morality that we're dealing with. Now, if you put this together, then secondly, this double defeat of Trump, the 19th, the trade deficit comes out highest in world history. The 20th, his tariffs are struck down as being unconstitutional, antithetical to the United States. Then you have the State of the Union address. And I will just say on the State of the Union address, Trump's view, I believe, is that to collapse it, his view is that the truth is for sissies. Strong men lie, and they do it better than anyone else. And what he does is he works the room like a real estate salesman, saying, we are the hot, this is a quote from his thing, we are the hottest economy anywhere in the world, the hottest. So try saying that 5 times in a row and your nose will grow longer. But I want to just pick one feature because the whole thing was riddled with lies and inventions. I want to pick just one feature of what he said in the interest of time in our discussion process. He said, as thousands of new businesses are forming and factories, plants, and laboratories are being built, we added 70,000 new construction jobs in a very short period. There's 2 different ways of presenting the construction jobs, seasonally and non-seasonally adjusted. The 70,000 figure doesn't exist, but if we could have the next slides. And I want to do this to get into the other side of the physical economy. So under Biden, and Trump despises Biden, so all he says repeatedly, Biden this, Sleepy Joe that, and so forth. Under Biden, whose policies were a disaster, but under Biden, the first year, you can see the increase from January of 2021 to January 2022, his first year in office, the construction jobs grew by 233,000. I then took the average for all 4 years from January 2021 through January 2025. These are all figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the Department of Labor. And the average increase was 226,000 new construction jobs, average for each of the 4 years. Under President Trump, when you actually consult the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the 70,000 melts into 44,000. But Trump, in the speech, said that Biden's economy was dead. So if Biden had 226,000 new construction jobs, and that's dead, then Trump is 81% below dead. And that's quite remarkable. Now, next slide, please. This, under President Diane Sayer, we're going to have 1.5 million new construction jobs per year. And I say that I want to show you why. We're not picking a large figure and just throwing it out. But I will say that this is 37 times the number of construction jobs Trump did in his first year in the hottest economy in the world. So I want to show you why this is the case. And I'm going to use two examples to show this. There's many things that we could touch on, but I wanted to open this up to a higher level. Next, please. Now, this is a report, and you can see in the top, ASCE, and that means the American Society of Civil Engineers. And they're civil engineers who build things. And this is their 2025 report card on America's infrastructure, which you can see in the upper, to me, looks like left-hand corner. And there's 15 categories and so forth that they go through. I'm going to pick one of the 15 just to give people a real sense of where we stand. And I'm going to pick dams, which is, if you look at the top, it's aviation, and the next one is dams. But you could take any one of these, and we'll see where we are right now. Next one, please. So these are pictures from the report itself. Dams, they give a D+. Let's look at how many dams we have in the United States. Next one, please. So it says the U.S. is home to more than 92,000 dams, which are responsible for flood control, irrigation, water supply, conservation, river navigation, hydropower generation, mine waste storage, and recreation. You may have never thought about how important these are. They are absolutely critical and represent the development of civilization. You can find out the building of dams going back to Egypt and far, far beyond that. Only 4% are owned by the federal government. The remaining 95% are owned by state or local government. The next statement is very critical. More than 16,800 dams are classified as high hazard potential, meaning that if they were to rupture, you would have cities which are, relative to these dams, are generally downstream. You would have massive loss of life, not just small loss of life in some cases, depends on the dam, I should say, and destruction. By the way, the next sentence tells you the dams are 64 years old. That's the average age of the dams in the United States. So next one, please. Let's look at these high hazard dams, and you may not be able to read the print. I just copied these from the report, but you'll see at the bottom, you probably can't read it. It's the National Inventory of Dams. That's actually done every year. And if you look at 2003, there were 10,000 high hazard dams. They keep getting worse because they're so aged and not maintained to the standards that they should be, that we now have 16,800, I'll call it 17,000 dams by 2023, which are high hazard. That's 18.1% of all dams in America. So to round it off, 20% of all the dams in the United States are in a situation that, are they to burst, you will have destruction and loss of life. And very little is being done about it because you can see it's getting worse, not better. Next, please. Now, this is another figure from the report. It's nothing spectacular. It's just, they say, for the non-federal dam rehabilitation, what would it cost? And they said in 2022 it would be 75.7 billion. By 2024, you may not be able to read the figures. It's 165 billion. When you add in other things that are associated with these dams, and on just the limited grounds of which these engineers looked at it, and they are limited, you're closer to 225 to 250 billion. That's $250 billion right there. What happens if you don't attend to these dams? Next one, please.
Okay, I just have to say, since you brought that up, this is less money than we sent to Ukraine.
Right.
Just by way of
Yes.
comparison. I mean,
Yes.
really, it shows you it doesn't have to do with money. Okay, next, sorry.
But you're absolutely right. It's physical goods. So there was a lot of coverage of Hurricane Helene, and we covered it in the EIR in the November 15th, 2024 issue. And what was held up a lot was Asheville, North Carolina. And what people saw was this place was destroyed. Well, what was not said, but we report in the EIR, I won't go through it here, is that the Asheville, where there were variously reported between 45 and 60 of the 217 deaths that occurred in this region, about 120 in North Carolina, but other states. There were several other states in which they occurred. That happens to be up in the mountains of the Appalachian Mountains. It's called the Blue Ridge in North Carolina. And it's an historical feature that has existed for tens and tens of thousands of years. So we know how to deal with these things. It didn't arise the last day. And some people said it was because the National Guard was taken out of North Tennessee and North Carolina. It's not the reason. In 1965, there was a proposal by the Tennessee Valley Authority of a very sound program because they know how to build dams. They built 19 of them in the whole valley, and they ended flooding. They have irrigation and so forth. And the project was killed by a coalition of budget-cutting Republicans and environmental nutcase Democrats. And so between 1965 and 1970, when the Environmental Protection Act came into force, there was a huge battle. The forces of progress lost, and all the dams and the levees and the flood containment walls, which were recommended in this report, which would have left almost no deaths, were never built. Now, to therefore, what I estimate is 225 billion, you would have to add what dams need to be built across the country, like the ones in North Carolina along the French Broad River, as it's called, and there's extensions of it. And what we would do under a Sayer administration, I would think, you send out the engineers and you send out the surveyors, and they know their stuff, and they probably have done it in each of the 50 states already. And you put together an assessment and say, what do we have to build there? And you're probably up to $300 to $400 billion. But it's not the dollars, it's the physical goods. And the one thing I would just say to our colleague, Jose Vega, who keeps bringing up training people, what you do is you send out youth. They work in teams at camps to develop these things and their projects. Maybe they'll just end up carrying wood for the first 3 or 4 weeks. But then they'll start to be taught hydraulics. And then they'll start to be taught how to do cementing and how to grade things. And as they do it, they will be taking classes at night, which will not be academic classes where they're sitting and saying, gee, I hope I get a C so I can get a good job in the investment business. But they'll be, because their lives will be tied to trying to develop this in America. Now, this raises the question, and it's just one of 15 areas. And the other failure of this report, as you'll note, as you'll see in a second, is all the national projects, like 42,000 miles of high-speed rail, are not in this because I don't count them. That's the other limitation. But the point I want to get at is we have to see how we think about an economy. It's not just numbers. It's how do you use infrastructure and other features to extend human life and extend the cognitive powers of each of the citizens, which is the object of economics. So the next one, please. Okay. 3 projects, if we could, the Bering Strait. First one is the Bering Strait Rail Tunnel Project. We have seen this many times on the Diane Sayer show. I won't go through it. Excuse me. But this is a gigantic project. This will bring tremendous amount of construction because we can't get from the lower 48 states up until to where the Bering Strait is. We have to build a whole bunch of rail there. Next, please. This is the 42,000 miles of high-speed electrified rail in the United States, which also will go to Canada and also to Mexico. But this thing needs tremendous amounts of nuclear power. We figure about 50 nuclear power plants because it's all electric generated. And it will also build in the United States a whole network connecting all major cities, both for passenger rail, but we will be adding in regular freight rail. Next, please, last one. Now, this is, of course, the North American Water Power Alliance, which is a revolutionary program, which many people on this show, watching this show, will know, where you're moving water from up in Alaska and other places, the Yukon and Mackenzie rivers, and you're bringing it down and irrigating 21 states, changing the water patterns, changing the agricultural yields by 4 times in some of the states and so forth, all the way into Mexico. If you look at these projects and what we just outlined before, that 1.5 million jobs that I said that the Sayer presidency would do, they are not made up numbers. That's reality. That's what we need to do. Now, they're 37 times Trump, but don't think of it only that way. Think of it as we have a conception, Diane has a conception, Paul, and you know, that is a different conception of what economics can actually do. In other words, you could say Trump fell relative to Biden, fine. And Biden's pathetic. He's only 1/6 of what Diane would do. But that's comparing one static number to another. What we're saying with the 1.5 million is not a comparison of whether this was rising. It's of a different manifold entirely. And that's where the economics has to go. So I'll stop here.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And yes, I think you are familiar with my program. So you're not making things up. You know, I want to bring up the Epstein question in this context because part of this, what we're dealing with is this complete air of unreality, the immorality of people, the idea that the measure is human life. That's the measure of your, the whole point of economy, whether people are particularly religious or not, somehow, even if you're not, you have to admit that the human being is the most advanced form of life creature. There's something really unique about human beings. We're the pinnacle of the development of the universe so far. We don't know where there might be something more advanced somewhere, but not, it doesn't appear in our solar system, at least. So therefore, we act in coherence with the laws of nature, with the way the universe has been created, to advance that even further by an act of will. Now, what does it mean, therefore, when you have an entire class of people who are unbelievably rich in monetary terms, but think that they can degrade human beings, destroy the lives of children, women, and others for some worldview? They actually are cannibalizing the source of wealth, whether figuratively or literally, perhaps. And I think, frankly, that people don't have a strong enough gut sense of why this is so wrong. Both of you brought up that the Congress is not using their powers. We have a constitution. Our constitution is excellent. but we have so few people with the courage and the passion to insist that our nation behave, conduct itself according to these standards. And what you cited about Richard, I think it was you, about how many acts have actually been passed by Congress relative to other sessions, because everything's being done by emergency decree, is amazing. So I'll just open it up. Maybe, Paul, if you have more that you want to say, why don't you go ahead, and then Richard.
Well, I think this is very dramatically a reason, perhaps the reason, that we have to properly celebrate the 250th birthday of the United States, an anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, because the United States history is peppered with leaders, including presidents, who have foreseen very, very rapid population growth, driven in significant part by immigration. Abraham Lincoln, for example, foresaw an American population of 500 million by the end of the 19th century. Benjamin Franklin had similar views. John Quincy Adams had similar views that the country would expand its population simultaneously in productivity, in the level of education, and in optimism. And it would do that, or it would express that optimism by encouraging, welcoming a very rapid growth of its population. And again, significantly contributed to by immigration. In opposition to that, we see now a view of the American population which sees it as being invaded by people who are looking for that kind of, one way or another, for that kind of productivity. It's by no means limited to trying to push out people who have committed a crime by crossing the border, or that plus other crimes. It includes seeking to push out people who have had temporary protected status as immigrants for various reasons of disaster events in their own countries. It's attempting to push out people with H-1B visas, people with skills that would enable them to perform high-skilled jobs in the United States. A campaign against Indians, for example, which is raging in a number of states. This is pessimism. This is the opposite of the American view, and it actually foresees limiting and even stopping the growth of the American population, in directly opposed to what the founders thought, to what the leading presidents in our history have thought. It means that if you have that view, and apparently if Epstein was Mephistopheles, there have been an awful lot of Dr. Faustus's running around accepting his offer of services because they wanted individual power. They wanted power over other people. They wanted to be able to do bad things to other people and get away with it. And therefore, Mephistopheles was the devil for them. That's clearly what's involved in this attraction of, I think, overwhelmingly very, very wealthy people to Epstein's services, and he became one of those very, very wealthy people in the process. We simply can't tolerate that kind of deep pessimism. I would call it more, it's an outlook of gloom regarding the human population and the desire to really get rid of as much as possible of it in various ways. It's absolutely anathema to the American system of economics, and underlying that to the culture of America, its historical culture, which has been exactly the opposite.
Richard, thoughts?
Yeah, I think two things. I mean, one is this Epstein is Lyndon LaRouche would always talk about um, uh, uh, powers and principalities, quoting Ephesians 6. That's where the way the oligarchy works. It's not even concerned about its immediate profit, but believe me, they want the lower 99% of the population, or helots, to turn over the wealth. But they're concerned with preserving that system and its power. That's their objective, is to preserve the system and its power. And what it strikes me, this Epstein thing is that some people were allowed to have crumbs at the lower end of the table and thought themselves privileged to be in this network of perversity. And anyone who thinks that the oligarchy are not perverse, I mean, they're the most perverse. They come out of literally brigands and bandits and so forth. I mean, in every country. Now, to take the statement Paul's making on the population, I think that's absolutely critical. Look, Paul and I discussed it this afternoon, and I don't want to repeat what he said because it's very, very, very good. If you look at the United States right now, we're for every woman in childbearing age range, which varies, but it's often considered to be 18 to 49 or 18 to 54. We're now having only 1.62 children born. And if you look at, I looked at this afternoon, if you look at only the white population, which some people only want, really, it's down to 1.52 and it's fallen. What's going to happen is that we are going to reach a point with the collapse of the election process, with the destruction and degradation of the cognitive power, which is what's going on. And I will just say, I was so sickened by the State of the Union address because it was like a football game in a mosh pit. It had nothing to do with the dignity of the people who were, who walked those halls. But if you do this, we are going to reach a point where we will be a shrinking nation. Throw out the immigrants who are human beings. That's the key point. Everyone, you've made Diane and others, Paul. These are human beings in God's image. They're not a piece of dirt that you lie about and call them drug addicts and all so forth. Now, maybe that's 3%. Their crime is that the world is in wars, typified by certain things we're doing in Venezuela, Cuba, and now maybe Iran. And they have no stability. And they came here to do what? To get a job and support the family. That's a crime. So maybe we have to, we can't have unrestricted immigration, but you can work on those questions if we were growing. But the point is that we are going to become a dying nation by our policies in many, many different aspects. But this idea of the pessimism, that is critical, I think. I think it's absolutely critical. And look, on terms of the optimism, the thing I just want to say one thing on the State of the Union. Mary Jane, my wife, and I were watching. And what happened is you would have Trump say something and everyone would jump up, led by Vance and Johnson. Yeah, USA, USA. And they did it so many times. I said, this is like a hockey game. It's like the hockey game. And 7 minutes later, in walks the hockey team. And Trump gives a Medal of Honor to someone who's a goalie. I mean, these games are fine. I mean, I walk, I do certain things. I played sports when I was young, but these children's games. And so he gets a Congressional Medal of Honor. And what I thought of how sad this is the lowering of culture, which had the John Quincy Adams speaking in the Amethyst case about the dignity of people. That you had Roosevelt go there to deliver a message that this was a day of infamy. That you had people who were great eloquence, Right, the last, even though he didn't read it because it wasn't the policy at the time, the 1865 State of the Union of Lincoln, read it. And this degraded culture of just beer chugging, think of what that means to our country, who, as you're both emphasizing, with tremendous dollops of pessimism thrown on top.
Well, we have to change it. And it's not the whole world, but that's part of the criminality of the control of the news media, because people here largely have no idea the despair in China during the Cultural Revolution, which Helga Zeppler-Rouche describes. She, being a rather wild nonconformist, sneaked onto a freight boat and got into China in the middle of the Cultural Revolution, and described people were coming up to her and they would start crying. It was depressed, it was impoverished, it was horrible. I met a woman actually at a Chinese New Year celebration. She's very supportive of the current government in China, but she happens to be on the board of a major musical organization. I said, "Do you play an instrument?" And she said, "Well, I used to play the piano." And I said, "What do you mean used to? Don't people always?" She said, "No, I was a child during the Cultural Revolution. I played the piano and they took my piano away, and that was that. I couldn't do it. And I came to the United States in late 70s, early 80s. But now here she is, celebrating the Chinese New Year with people from the current Chinese government." But so we look at how broken down, the despair, the pessimism, the collapsing infrastructure, the misery. And in one sense, it's worse, as Schiller said, because if you have a society that's more advanced and more ennobled and it falls backward, that is one of the ugliest things ever to see. Where China under Mao, I mean, they also had great advances, but I don't think it had been really developed. It wasn't as if they had modern high-speed rail and then he bombed all the railroad stations or something. But nonetheless, it was horribly impoverished, and in a very short amount of time, everything changed. And I think this is something that I hope to do with my campaign, is to give Americans a vision that the way you're living now, you don't have to live that way. No one should live that way. Like Martin Luther King and the Montgomery bus boycott. We're not, we said we're not going to participate in an unjust system anymore. It is simply a violation of the principles of natural law and justice for someone to sit or be forced to stand on a bus because of the color of their skin. We're not doing that. And I think the American people need to get it in their gut. If you realize what it's like to ride on a train that goes 300 miles an hour very smoothly, or to be able to pay your rent or your mortgage with 1 week's pay, like it used to be in the 60s, where one person working 40 hours a week could support a family of 4 or 5 or 6 people, take a vacation, put money aside for college, have decent health insurance. That, I think, is unimaginable to so many people. And I think if people get an image of that, but also the rapidity, that we can decide to change it. The economy serves us. It is not a natural thing like the Grand Canyon, where suddenly you walked off the cliff and there you're in it. No, we created it and we can change it. And Paul, I actually wanted to, you can respond however you want, but I also wanted to ask if you would very kindly explain to people, what did Lincoln mean by the tariff, and what is the actual purpose of a tariff, as opposed to what they are calling a tariff under the current administration?
Well, in the Lincoln administration's case, it was the Morrill tariff, which was passed in 1861. I don't know if it was designated as an act of 61 or 62, but it was passed in 1861. It was a uniform tariff with some variations by product, um, which was applied to imports from any place. Um, and it was later that was later improved upon by the McKinley tariffs, in that some of those tariffs had the immediate intention of reciprocal reductions in tariffs between the United States and the other country involved, the exporter involved. But the Morrill tariff, which to Lincoln was one of the principles of, as he said, I believe in the tariff, I believe in the national bank, and it was one of the principles of American system economics to him and to many others at the time, that domestic production and domestic commerce would be protected from interventions which would disrupt and destroy it, because there were, at that time, still marginally more powerful nations who wished to stop, to retard, even to destroy the rapid economic progress that was being made in the United States.
I just want to interject something here, because that means that you had such an industry that you were actually protecting. Whereas if you take the tariffs put on things like fertilizer from Belarus or something, there's not a huge industry that we are protecting. This is being done punitively, and the farmers are the ones paying for it. So it seems you first have to have the requisite that the nation is actually trying to develop a productive economy.
And productive internal trade, that is domestic commerce among the industries that are developing in the United States. The second national bank in the 30s and 20s and 30s and even early 40s of the 19th century was an example, because it was providing credit for the transformation of agriculture in the direction of much more productive farms on which not just the farmer and his wife and children worked, but employees worked and received reasonable wages for their work. And that was developing very rapidly, with a rapid increase in what the United States was capable of producing in the way of food and agricultural goods. The purpose of, at that time, the Second National Bank leadership was to protect that from interventions and dumping and other interventions which would, in trade, which would disrupt the development among industries. So it was not just to protect the individual industry, but to protect the ability of these industries to feed one another in their development. In other words, to keep the producer and the consumer, the next producer who is the consumer of that production, to keep them relatively close together geographically, to keep the transportation costs between them low, to enable them to invest and grow. All of that was being pursued by fairly simple tariff policies, which were combined with what they then called bonuses, but we call them subsidies, in order to foster the economics of production in various industries. Alexander Hamilton had, in his report on manufacturers, had actually gone through product by product and recommended whether the application of a tariff there would be best, or the application of bonuses or subsidies would be best for the producers of it, or a combination of the two, essentially setting a price floor so that that industry could develop. It's an overall approach which goes beyond production and actually contributes directly to industrialization, industrial development, which at that time was becoming unprecedented. The United States was beginning to have mass not only industrialization, but mass production, which no other country in the world came anywhere near matching in the course of the 19th century. So that's what Lincoln meant by it. And it obviously required that immigrants be coming in from all over the place at a high rate and being put to work in these industries and in the expansion of agriculture. He would never have thought of defining immigrants as some kind of invasion of the, I mean, my God. Anyway.
If I could add one thing to that, what Paul said, which is excellent. Look, you have to, when approaching the American system, you can't pick and choose. It's not like walking into a restaurant or a smorgasbord and I'll take this. I'll have the buttered duck, but I won't have that. It's an integrated package. What Lincoln did, just as an example on banking, is he took the wildcat banking, which had been introduced actually all the way back to Andrew Jackson, but you had over 10,000 currencies in America because you had banks that just set up and could produce their own currency. And what he did is he said, you're all the state currencies, if you want to operate a state bank, you're going to have to pay a large fee or you're going to become a national bank. Because if you become a bank chartered by the nation, then we can regulate you. And they were told that, and they did. And he brought that together along with a greenback credit system, which, don't forget, the greenback is the first time we had a sovereign currency in a very long time in the United States. It was directed towards the war effort, but it filtered out exactly into the mass production. Look, the machine tool tolerances, meaning the levels of errors that you could make, increased 3 orders of magnitude because they were producing uniforms for the Union soldiers, but it spread to everything else. We had to build the iron industry, which, as people know, was Carnegie. And the person who was the head of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Thomas Scott, became the Assistant Secretary of War, brought Carnegie in to work with him, and we started building railroads. And then we, of course, passed the Transcontinental Railroad, by which we, by the way, built 5. So you have protection of currency and of banking. You have protection of your expansion of your industries. You had all sorts of other things that were going on. You're fighting and eliminating slavery because of your concept of man. And therefore, it's an integrated package. You can't just say, I'm going to, when you have people signing the Genius Act to say that we're going to have crypto as a currency, when in the State of the Union address, you say 58 times, this is a quote, or 50, the stock market went up 58 times. How can you claim such a person is anti-speculation? How can you say they're for a national bank? They hate it. So you have to have an integrated package. That's what you represent, Diane. And I just want to say, the pessimism is there, but this can be turned as we give man the sense of him being the most beautiful species. This can be turned, I think, very, very quickly. And I think if we just point out who's doing these failures, and it really is the City of London. People may say, well, Trump's against the City of London. He's not. The City of London can deal with all sorts of crazy people. They're not Democrat. They're not Republican. That's just, or Labor or conservative. Forget it. They want to preserve a system, and they can use something like that to run. That's who our enemy is in this case. And I think that the Epstein, but also all the other work that we're doing, can bring this down if we survive to Monday, which, by the way, I just want to mention, as everybody knows, is going to be a fantastic, March 2nd is going to be a fantastic event that it's going to be held.
Yes, and that can be found at theschillerinstitute.com, and I will be participating in it as well on Monday. So I'd like to encourage everyone. We're coming to the end of our time. Paul, do you have any closing remarks? Anything you'd like to say?
You started out with a few strategic notes on the danger of the wars that are already going on and the one with Iran that may be breaking out at any time, it seems. I think that Americans have to take seriously that if the administration is actually looking at them and saying, really, we know that you're very worried about the condition of the economy, about inflation, about employment, about all of these things. So we're going to take on and conquer one or more other countries in order to make you feel better. If Americans realize that that is what's going on and they tolerate it, then they really don't have the moral fitness to survive. You're being played in that way to a certain extent. You don't like what's happening to the economy. Don't worry. Look over here where we're conquering this country or that country. You'll feel better. If you let yourself be manipulated in that way, you really are, you're helping to put the nation in extreme danger. And you're also degrading yourself by being led in that way, chanting USA, USA, USA as we bomb a country. I mean, really, we know what that's about. We know what that gimmick is, if it could be called a gimmick.
Yeah. Richard.
I think this, I do think it's the physical economy has now come to the fore, along with all the questions of war and the quality of mankind and the beauty we can bring. But I think that has come to the fore. The trade deficit just reflect, it is so enormous. Much of the trade policy was just a policy to attack other nations. I mean, South Africa is being beaten up because they supported the rights of Palestinians to have a nation. We saw all of that being used in the emergency basis, but it brought to the fore it happened because the economy is collapsing, and we didn't even go into what you did in your State of the Union, the level of literacy and so forth. This is going to have a tremendous effect. People cannot afford to live in the United States. The lower 40%, which is 140 million people, it's not small. We're a country of 330 million. That could change if we kick out immigrants and don't change the policies internally. But they can't live. They can't survive. People know it. You can say anything, but the people know that. And the more that we invoke that reality and bring the answers of a higher manifold, 1.5 million construction jobs. Paul could say what the manufacturing jobs are. We should be adding about 2 to 3 million. That's what we thought per year. But those are just predicates of a mental outlook of how you run your country. And, I think this Monday is going to be very exciting. I think everybody should tune in. But I just think that, Diane's State of the Union address stands so far above and head and shoulders above anything that I have heard uttered in the last 40 years, except for Lynn's campaign, so less 27 years, whatever. It's so refreshing. But it's not just refreshing. It's, we're at an emergency period. So that's what I would offer.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. I would urge people to watch this spot. Paul, did you want to say something else? You look like you're inhaling.
No. I was just going to say thank you for giving us the opportunity. It makes a much better picture when several people are able to present it and fill it out simultaneously. I think we've given people something to think about in place of something to merely worry about. So thanks for that.
Well, thank you. And I'm just sending a link to my website to everyone. Please donate to my campaign. Don't say, the election's in 2028. We're trying to stop World War III right now. This campaign is a campaign to fill the presidency with presidential policies and initiatives, which are lacking at the moment. And that means right now. So thank you both. And we'll see everyone soon. And if we manage to, we'll be back here next week. The world makes
Okay.
it.
Great.